This is Buffalo, What's Next? I'm Jay Moran.
I'm Bridget Jaipaul-Valenza.
And I'm Dave Debo. If ever there was an issue that demands more discussion now, the racist massacre at Tops Friendly Markets on May 14th is it.
America has a long, deep, rich history of racism brutalizing black communities.
But where does it go from here? What does our community need?
We must work and teach our children.
What issues just aren't being addressed?
As long as we keep doing the same thing, we're just sitting ducks for the next mass shoot. That's all you can say.
This is a new program. Every weekday, we'll set aside this hour to hear from the community about issues that can no longer be held back.
We need to make a concerted effort in our nation, in our institutions, and yes, in our families.
And this is Dave Debo. Coming up later on the program, Max Anderson from Open Buffalo is here. He'll be with Jay Moran talking about leadership and activism and really the roles I think that activists can play since the shooting. But first, Jennifer Connor is with me. She's executive director of Justice for Migrant Families. There are groups that the name almost says it all. They work with some of the region's new Americans and those who are seeking asylum and those who are also economic refugees and those who are trying to work their way through the legal system here. Often black and brown people that come here from work. So there's a corollary here, and I think in light of the situation on May 14th, there is much for us to discuss. Before she was with Migrant Families, she had done some work down in New Orleans in the wake of Hurricane Katrina, and that to me is really interesting, folks. There's a parallel there and a lot of interesting things we can get into. So much to talk about. Jennifer, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I think over the course of the discussion here, we can get into what the group is, what Justice for Migrant Families does. But the quickest of overviews, who do you serve?
Yeah, so Justice for Migrant Families, our community includes people who have entanglement with immigration enforcement, people involved in who are in immigrant detention or released from it, people who are undocumented in Buffalo, people who have come here for work as economic refugees because there's no work in their country of origin, and then asylum seekers who are in very long processes and in kind of immigration limbo.
So when I hear the word migrant, I immediately think of workers from south of the border in the fields on farms. Not necessarily the case. No,
that there are certainly many workers who are here keeping New York's agricultural industry going, dependent on them. And we certainly work with in community with some of those folks. But no, we're talking about people as well from many countries in Africa and Asia, in many countries.
And I'm reminded of Dr. King, the letter from a Birmingham jail. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. For you, there's a commonality here. No?
A commonality between?
The people of the East Side who were targeted by the shooting. And some of the populations you work with.
Yeah. So first of all, we certainly have community members who are on the East Side and who live in the general area or who were certainly impacted by a white supremacist attack in their general neighborhood. And secondly, there is absolutely a correlation of attacks motivated by racism, by white supremacy, and even in the person's writings, they name immigrants, people of color, and Jewish people. And these are all groups that have been targeted by white supremacy.
And you think there were immigrants in the store?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Of course there were. It's a neighborhood with a diverse array of people, and it is a primarily black community, but that doesn't mean it's not a diverse array of people either, by language, by country of origin, by people's personal histories.
What stories have they shared? Because I imagine for a person of color, being targeted is not something they want, not something they expected, but certainly something that is within their frame of reference. If we're talking about a new immigrant, they might not necessarily understand the idea of, if it is understandable, a gunman coming in and shooting at black people.
So we did try to check in with our community, with members, and there are many different perspectives even those people had, or not perspectives, reactions and impacts. So we certainly saw impacts on the children, the fear amongst children, and then for families to just let their children go out. Buffalo was immediately also followed by Uvalde, and so for Latino families, they saw it in Buffalo, and then among the Spanish-speaking community. But bigger picture, people have come here often fleeing violence in their home countries, and so this to see this type of violence then in their home community now, it's
triggering at the very least. At
the very least, triggering and discouraging and inspiring so much fear and isolation, really, making people want to isolate. And then secondly, people do, especially people who've been here for less time, they don't necessarily have the cultural and historical context to understand what's happening and what is the source of this problem. And there's a lot of room for education there and conversations. People who have been here for a little bit longer and also who have, honestly, more English access or more language accessibility are able to grapple with it in a different way.
That was the part that I was picturing is the cultural relevance. People who have been in the United States have at least an awareness. People who haven't might not. How do you talk to them? What do you do? How do you explain it? Well, gee, America's inherently racist. What do you say?
I say that we are at this point because of hundreds of years of history of genocide and enslavement of people, and that is the historical root of getting us here today, and that doesn't. Those roots run deep, and we have not healed as a country from them. And that's a starting point where I'm trying to explain very quickly where some of this comes from, because I don't think just by walking around on the East Side and looking around, you can say, oh, I can see where the roots of historical disinvestment come from. You can't see it, but just by looking, what you see are storefronts that are run down or places that have not been taken care of.
And more than I think historical disinvestment, we've had a lot of guests on the program previously say that America's history is violent. And I'm not talking just slavery. I'm talking generally violence. There was a lot on social this weekend about people who didn't necessarily feel comfortable celebrating July 4th. Are you one of them?
I never feel comfortable celebrating July 4th. People were not free on July 4th, 1776. I was born on the bicentennial, 1976.
Okay.
I personally don't feel comfortable, but and always the fireworks in Buffalo, some people love them, and always for many of the immigrants who I know, it actually has been something to really get used to, where people who've come from war zones, but then now you can argue that after May 14th, that a lot of people would be really uncomfortable.
Sure.
Yeah.
Triggering there as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about Katrina. It was something you undertook yourself back in 2005. You were in a different role then. It wasn't through Justice for Migrant Families, but I think there's a lesson there that we can talk about. You went down in the wake of Hurricane Katrina and stayed there for a couple of months, several months?
Yes, from November to May. And
Go ahead.
Yeah. So I was living in Charlottesville, Virginia at the time when the Katrina hit, and I heard about so many of the failed attempts to help, in quotes. And so I was really feeling failed attempts by sort of well-intentioned white people, and I don't even know if well-intentioned might be an overstatement, and of the way that racism really infused a lot of those rescue attempts. So I thought, you know what, as a white person, I could do I could do better, but I waited for a moment when I saw a place where my skills could be used, a group that had already existed on the ground, that was already doing the work, and a place that was inviting help. And I named those three things because I think in this moment in Buffalo, that's important as well for people who want to do the work, the long-term work. And so I went to Katrina, and I actually, I rebuilt bicycles. I worked on people's homes. So I worked on bicycle distribution. I worked on people's homes.
And in the process, you were in the community. You were out there. You were seeing some of the long-term effects. And here's maybe where the parallel comes in. The long-term effects of what happens to cities and neighborhood and people who are neglected and deprived of resources systemically over a long period of time.
Yeah. So New Orleans is an unbelievably culturally, historically rich place with amazing people. And it was so clear that a natural disaster had been preceded by man-made disaster, by man-made human-made disinvestment, by, for example, the failure to adequately maintain canals in neighborhoods of communities of color, as one example, or by the attempts of the armed sheriff to prevent people from escaping over the bridge from New Orleans, turning people back who were fleeing a natural disaster. So there was layer on layer of the way that it was a human-created disaster as well. And then afterwards with the displacement, the ongoing displacement, and then the sort of opportunistic land grab that happened afterwards, again, just fueled by white supremacist systems.
So for you, it's more than Dr. King's letter. It's more than otherizing certain people, the folks of New Orleans or the folks of the East Side, deprived of resources, and therefore it's easy for us to kind of just, dismiss them. For you, it was more than that. There were things, like you said, speculation, land grabs after the fact. There was the idea, and we can get into this, someone told you that you should either move in or go home. That to me is really interesting.
Yeah. So I was there for a while doing the sort of immediate work that needed to be done, where people were trying to get people transportation and get people's homes cleaned out. And after a number of months, people were in a better position. People had a chance to return, reorganize. People on the ground were organizing, longtime community members. And that, yes, there was a point at which they said, you have to either commit to, you live here, or go home and do this same work back in your community, because this wasn't just a hurricane. This uncovered how our white supremacist history has led us to this point. So, and I did. I went home and to Charlottesville, Virginia.
There's much to say about Charlottesville.
Which we might not have
We'll
time
get
for,
there.
Yeah.
But
so.
I remember the headline recently in Business First of Buffalo, something to the effect of what happens after CNN goes away.
Yes.
Talking specifically about the East Side.
Yeah.
People helicoptered in, thoughts and prayers, and then what? You saw that in Katrina, too.
I did see that in Katrina, and I do think we have an opportunity in this moment. So an opportunity to invest in, again, the community-centered solutions that are generated, that do exist on the East Side, that simply lack investment and resources. Additionally, really growing the creative leaders that we need in the future. And I know you have Max Anderson coming on, Emerging Leaders Program. I want to shout that one out as an on-the-ground resource we need creativity to approach our future. And then, but we also have to stop the bad. So right now with city redistricting going on, this is an absolutely related issue where what happens with redistricting really matters a lot on the East Side for representation. And that process has not been there's a lot of room for the public to intervene there. There's because it was initially not happening in a transparent and democratic way. And that really matters for voting futures, for districts, and for how resources are allocated.
Let me go off on that tangent for just a moment. We are a city where the city council is majority minority. Does redistricting matter? He asks somewhat rhetorically.
Redistricting really matters as a racial equity issue because our population has changed, and actually we've had population growth. We've had growth in communities of color, and so our districts need to represent that. And actually right now, people are sort of racially drawn into fewer districts. So we really should be seeing more representation. And additionally, we need to see women on city council.
Okay. All right. Let's go back to the Katrina parallels. I did want to touch on redistricting because I know that's a key issue for you. But you spoke about Katrina and I think the East Side and the idea of community-based solutions. The idea that somewhere in the process there needs to be an assessment of what is needed on the ground rather than just, again, having these people helicopter in, as it were.
Yes. And I mean, we also have seen which groups have had an ongoing presence there. I'm very excited to see investment in the African Heritage Food Co-op. Colored Girls Bike 2 has had an ongoing transportation equity project. So and I could go on and on the list. There are people generating creative solutions. And because I'm here with Justice for Migrant Families, I also want to say that in that process, we need language access all across the board. And then additionally, as a small community group that has dealt with issues of rapid response, food distribution, health access, it can't all be small community groups. That's where investment and then actually having the city and county and state fund and create more equitable programs does matter.
There is an effort in the community to try and reach out to Wegmans, Dashes, Aldi's, someone to bring in a new and different grocery store. Is that the kind of thing that goes counter to what you're saying? That's a large corporation, a Wegmans coming in, and profits would presumably trickle back to Rochester to some degree. That's different than the kind of community solution you're talking about, isn't it? I think, again, we have opportunity in this moment. So I named African Heritage Food Co-op. I also would name the Worker Cooperative Incubator, Buffalo's Worker Cooperative Incubator. But we have opportunity to come up with solutions that keep dollars in our community. But I have to say, this is where community listening really matters, because there may be people who say, I'm sure there are people who would say, I would love to have 3 different grocery stores to choose from, right? So I think community listening that I can't, in some ways I can't answer for that, because you got to ask the people who are going to shop in the grocery stores. And I do live on the west side. I don't live on the east side. Are there parallels between those two communities? Is there the same kind of disinvestment or even otherization on the west side that certainly led to, everyone says, the attacks on the east side?
Well, the west side is less segregated by neighborhood, and then as a district, it is more compact. So there are some differences there. But Buffalo as a whole is a segregated city and experiences the effects of a racialized economic system. So everyone is impacted by that.
The Partnership for the Public Good found that 75, possibly 85% of all people of color in Buffalo live east of Main Street. That kind of segregation is just in the data.
Yeah.
What do we do about it?
Well, you didn't prepare me for the question. How do we solve segregation in Buffalo?
How do we solve? We have 10 minutes left, Jennifer. How do we solve all the problems the city faces?
So, again, I'm going to actually go back to redistricting to who our representatives are and having leaders who co-govern with community. So where it is an active dialogue between community members, but it's also not just it's not just 9 or 11 elected representatives if we increased. So housing is an absolute huge issue that I'm not an expert on.
Okay.
And then immigration.
I did not write it down in front of me, but that was actually next on my list.
Yeah,
so we will
housing's
touch
a
on
huge
that.
issue that matters very much to the immigrant community that I work with quite a lot. It's the number 2 need behind lawyers and legal support. But because I am here as a director of an immigration organization, again, I'm going to put out language access just because it passed at the state level. We have some of it in place locally, but that really matters for communities to just be able to communicate with each other and then advocate for what they need. And so I think that really matters in terms of desegregation.
Jennifer Connor is here. She is Executive Director of Justice for Migrant Families. If this was television, you would notice that she's wearing monarch butterfly earrings. That's the coalition's logo.
Yeah.
The idea that someone can be reborn as a butterfly. Is that what the relevance is there?
It's the symbol of free migration across borders.
Okay. Oh, because they fly everywhere.
They
I understand
travel
now.
from Mexico through the U.S., through Canada.
Okay, that makes sense.
No passports.
No passports required, just flap your wings. Okay. Talk more. And I did hear you say that you're not an expert, but you are someone who certainly, because of your work with migrants, has seen some of the issues this city faces involving housing. Talk to me about the scope of the problem and, to the degree you can, what we need to do to solve it.
Easy questions today.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think this goes back to access issues where there is a lot of discrimination, in my opinion, based on based on people's immigration status. So I think it's good for people in Buffalo to know that immigrants are not all one type, are not here through one route.
Okay.
People come here through many different means, and that each person's immigration story is unique and has different features to it. Most of the people that I know, work with, and in community with have real obstacles in accessing very basic needs. So a lot of people I know do not
And is that more than the language, which was on your list already?
Yeah, it is more than language. A lot of people don't have Social Security numbers. And so, for example, a worker cannot access unemployment if they are out of work. A single mother with a child can get food stamps for $200 for her child for a month, nothing for herself. A couple who is in a bad housing situation can either stay in their very bad housing situation or go live in a unfurnished home with no electricity that is offered to them. And I'm giving you real life examples. A family with a child who suddenly finds out that he has a chronic medical condition. Well, he's going to turn 18 in 4 years. He won't have health insurance after that. So for 4 years, he's going to get his medication after that. What will happen? Those are all real life examples. And there are solutions to all of these, which is why I named them. We could pass the Excluded No More legislation at the state level to include all workers in Buffalo in unemployment insurance. In terms of and there's, yeah, that's what. Maybe I'll just stick with that one. We're almost out of time. I have a laundry list.
Yeah,
and there's
her
ways
list
to
is
solve
long, and her passion
these
is large.
Access issues, but then I do want to highlight. I know Max is coming on next. Just the issues around policing and over-policing of communities of color. So this is really dangerous, and for people in our community that we don't have a good barrier between police and immigration, and there's no reason for it. So that could pass at the state level this year with New York for All. but also the county and city could enact a barrier between police and immigration. And that's also true for our city's license plate readers, that
When
there's
you
no
say
barrier.
a barrier between police and immigration, explain that. What do you mean?
It means that there would be no data and information sharing between police and immigration, that unless there was a judicial warrant, same as what is required for like someone to enter your home.
So a Buffalo officer stops someone because their taillight is out.
Yeah.
They enter it into the computer. In your world, it wouldn't automatically flag that they are an undocumented person.
Yeah, in my world, that officer, or what has happened, that officer would not then call Border Patrol
And say, hey, we got an undocumented here.
And because the person's speaking Spanish, and then that person would not come home that night to his family. So yeah, in not in my world, in the world that we are going to move towards, we are going to see that, broken taillight's a broken taillight, and that those two things are separate. And then in terms of our work in detention, which we definitely don't have time for, but it is very connected with the movement for decarceration. Those two systems, both policing and then detention and jails and prisons, mirror each other. And so anywhere that we can make progress in one, it ties to the other. And there's a parallel issue.
That's the other thing I wanted to touch on before we wind up here. The things you advocate for on behalf of migrant families certainly could have a spin-off effect for some of the problems that the East Side is facing. Address that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm talking about East Side residents. And over policing of communities of color is to say it's a big problem is an understatement. But we do have to stop the bad while we build the good. And so it's important to protect, and hand in hand with stopping over policing is the last one I don't have time for, which is to provide actual legal funding
aid
for legal resources for immigrants. And as an example, even for refugee families where their kids have grown up here, those kids then can often run into get caught in that kind of over-policing where it involves police, it involves immigration, and can end in disaster. But we don't have to have that. We could have better legal support in the city with city funding for some of those things, and then with policies.
Activists and advocates are in almost the business. I don't want to describe it as a business, but their avocation is to press for certain things. And oftentimes those certain things just don't happen, and they continue to press. So with you and others like you, I'm not sure this is as relevant as a question as it usually is, but I love to try and end the interview with the same question. I've asked it of many people. Do you have hope? After banging your head against the wall as many times as I imagine an activist does, do you have hope?
Absolutely. Every day I talk with people who've been through the most unbelievable trial and tribulation, and I have seen so many victories on the individual level, and I've seen victories on the systemic level too, even right now, as City Council is reconsidering their redistricting plan, and should hear from all of you who are listening.
I think this is an important issue for her, folks. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Well, it's a very current issue that's going to have implications for 10 years. And it really matters for immigrants, because immigrants are that's where our population growth came from. And that's why we can redistrict. And yet that process specifically there hasn't been outreach to immigrants. So also specifically for immigrant communities that might hear me today, call your city council person. They are supposed to represent you as well.
I'm intrigued, though, by the idea that you say you have hope, in part because you've seen systemic change. Change is possible.
Oh, yes, change is possible.
I am. Elaborate for me, because
on that side.
I think one of the things that has been an echo on this program from guest to guest to guest is that the problems the East Side is facing are certainly systemic. You're saying that systems can sometimes change, or is the parallel not exact here? I
think that for all of us in Buffalo who are looking to make change through all parts of the city, and certainly East Side-based organizations, we're ready for the moment when there's an opening, and you don't know when that catalyzing moment will come. So my perspective, we keep working, doing all of the day-to-day work. And we are ready for those catalyzing moments when we can really press and see something change. I know that we're in really demoralizing, dismaying, discouraging, disheartening, all of the disses times. But I think we all keep doing the work because there are openings, sudden moments of change.
And last question, what does Buffalo need?
To listen to the people and to let the people lead.
All right. Jennifer, thanks so much for being here. This has been enlightening and interesting. Jennifer Connor is the Executive Director of Justice for Migrant Families. If someone needs to know more, how do they get in touch?
We are on the web at justiceformigrantfamilies.org. We are on Facebook also, Instagram. Facebook and Instagram is our initials, JFMF of WNY.
All right, very good. Jennifer, thanks for being here. Coming up next, Jay Moran standing by with Max Anderson. He's from Open Buffalo. A lot of what they talk about is leadership and growing that next generation or even the current generation of activists willing to take on a role in the community. More to come. Stay with us.
Watch the WNED PBS original production Daredevils of Niagara Falls.
I think part of the lure of Niagara was that it was understood to be a very dangerous place.
A daredevil is somebody who goes out and does a daring thing. Maybe they make it and maybe they don't.
Daredevils of Niagara Falls, now streaming on YouTube and the PBS video app. It's one thing to love public media, but it's a special thing to support it. Consider this. If you've got a car you don't need anymore, or you've got one that's simply too expensive to repair, arrange to donate it to Buffalo Toronto Public Media. It's easy for you. Pickup is free, and it could be worth hundreds of dollars in support. Here's how to get started. Go to WNED.org/vehicles.
This is Buffalo What's Next, where we have conversations with the community about moving forward. To have your voice heard, press the Talk to Us button on the WBFO app, and we'll work to get your questions and comments on the air. Join us on Twitter at WBFO or email us at news@WBFO.org. Together, we'll have the conversations that are needed. This is WBFO, your NPR station.
And welcome back to Buffalo What's Next. With us, Max Anderson, Deputy Director of Open Buffalo. Max, hi.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you with us for sure here, Max. There's obviously a lot to get into. We've had some folks on from Open Buffalo already, but I feel that it's always good to reiterate because one of the goals of this show is to highlight elements inside the community. So let's just talk about Open Buffalo and its mission.
Great. So Open Buffalo's mission is to advance racial, economic, and ecological justice in Buffalo and to eradicate poverty, racism, and environmental racism. That comes in a lot of, our work comes in a lot of different a lot of different forms. Sure. Our main work is in leadership development and advocacy. So most people probably know us for our Emerging Leaders program, which has been running since 2015. We've had almost 150 graduates from that program over the years. They learn everything from organizing to relationship building to learning how to tell and cultivate their own personal story, finding the power that they have within them, and helping to connect with others and inspire them with their stories and organize and build something great and beautiful and big and bold to change the community around them. Sure.
So the Emerging Leaders program then, who seeks that out? Who do you seek for that program?
So it's each Emerging Leaders class is very eclectic. The barriers or thresholds for entry are people who have experienced some form of systemic injustice. So when we launched the program, we had some specific recruitment goals. We were looking for people who have had interaction with the criminal justice system. We're looking for women. We're looking for young people. We're looking for people of color. And we're looking for immigrants and refugees, new Americans, knowing that these are the people who are closest to the problems that we're dealing with as society, and we think that they're the people who are closest to the solutions and our most innovative folks. Our first class of emerging leaders had fast food workers who were active in the Fight for 15 movement to increase the minimum wage to $15 an hour, alongside law students, alongside people who worked for, we had some staffers for politicians and people who were like mid-level professionals, and our age range has gone from 17 to over 70. And everyone, comes together and, we are able to build relationships and distill down, what are the things that bring us together? What are the things we have in common? What resources do we all bring into the room in terms of our skills, our knowledge, and our networks and communities? And what can we do together to really change things and make the community better and safer?
So the individuals who are going through this Emerging Leaders Program, they've been touched by racial injustice in some sort of form. So it's very personal then. How do you work through that? I mean, do you utilize that personal element and try to take that passion and help lead it forward? Or is it something that you have to kind of distill down and make sure that it stays on a more, maybe a rational basis rather than getting too passionate?
It's, I would say it's controlled passion.
Okay.
We definitely find a balancing point of delivering and helping people cultivate hard skills, but also doing that self-work to look inward and explore what experiences they've been through. We do a lot of what we call getting on the bike. So just getting on and trying out some different practices of self-exploration, of journaling, of kind of going through your memory bank of different experiences you've had. What were some challenges you might have faced? What choices did you make in those scenarios, and what was the outcome? So, really helping you to, it can definitely be an emotional experience.
I would think, yes.
But, we over the years have made modifications to the program to give people space to breathe. We take them out, when we have resources to do so, we take our leaders out on retreats, like to Beaver Hollow, so they can kind of get out of their normal environment and normal stressors of daily life, and have a full weekend away to kind of work on themselves. And, hopefully by the end of the weekend or by the end of the program, or maybe a few years down the line, they'll have really cultivated their story and really understand themselves better, understand why they are called to leadership and, what they have to offer, and have the confidence to go out and tell people their story, the elements of their story that they feel empowered sharing. Not just going out and venting and dumping, all your traumas on someone, because, that can be triggering and traumatic to the listener as well. So it's definitely, it's a practice, and it's something that we work on refining constantly. It's done through, everyone who goes through the program has a mentor. We have coaches that help folks through the sessions to kind of work through any issues they might be resurrecting in their minds. But
it's interesting. Yeah. I was just going to say, sorry for cutting off, but just interesting. As you're talking about this, I could see how people would get attached to their stories, feel confident in a group. We're out at Beaver Hollow, talking to each other about it, but then making that jump. How do you help them, or how do you know, or how can they know? Be sure that. Well, now they're in a different setting. They're in a different setting. It's a work setting. It's a job interview, whatever the case may be. How do we know that they're going to be confident to take what they've learned here, tell that story of themselves and bring it to fruitful purpose?
It's just repetition. It's practice. We share in front of one another. We celebrate one another during the trainings. We do a talent show at the end.
Really?
But really, it comes down to just learning how to, when you're learning how to do your story and going through these processes, you're also learning how to listen and how to be an active observer and an active listener to people around you while they're telling their stories. So I like to say I have, an infinite number of stories to use at any given moment. But really, it's all about, if you're knocking on the doors, if you're canvassing, we've been doing a lot of canvassing of the community around Jefferson Avenue, where our office is, in the last few weeks. And, just being able to listen and observe and connect with people about basic human stuff. Like, I remember canvassing a few years ago in the Fruit Belt talking about housing issues and the need for a community benefits agreement with the medical campus or a land trust. We were working on these issues at the time. And the person whose door I knocked on, she had, I could tell I wasn't connecting just talking about these kind of economic development policies and mechanisms we're trying to build, right? But I asked, what do you... I mentioned something about how the community, we wanted to try to have a youth center or a community center built. And she's like, oh, yeah, we need something for these kids to do. I drive a bus, and, I could tell just by that one thing, she really latched on and connected with youth development and support and resources for youth. And we were able to have a conversation based off of that, which is an element of our plan at the time. But, it was... You have to really just be able to listen and observe people and see where they're at, ask questions in order to know how to connect with them best, right? That's really what it comes down to. So it doesn't have to be you don't have to try to shoehorn in your prefabricated story that you use to motivate people. It could be something about, how... I every morning when we're starting meetings, I'll bring up some challenge that I overcame with getting a 3-year-old dressed and her hair done and fed and out the door on time before getting to work. So, and a lot of people can connect to those kind of things, like parents, family, and community issues. So it's really just being open and observing and listening to people.
Interested then, because I did see on your website how you guys have been canvassing in that Jefferson neighborhood in the last few weeks. What are we hearing? What are you hearing from folks? I mean, some of it seems obvious, but at the same time, it's one of the things that we've discovered here in the last month of doing this show. Everybody has their own story. Everybody has their own issue, and it in many cases can be quite profound, especially considering what happened on May 14th, right there in the neighborhood. What are you hearing from people?
So we are located 1 block from Tops, and we're in that neighborhood constantly. Like most of our time is spent over there. We did some canvassing on like Laurel and Riley streets a few weeks ago. Well, we've been doing it consistently, but I'm thinking of a specific time a few weeks ago. And some people haven't left the house. Some people are scared to venture out into large public spaces. Some people definitely don't want to go back into that. You're
business. Hearing that some people aren't going to go back there.
Yeah, so it's a mixture. Obviously, when immediate needs need to be met, you need food, we need water, we need shelter. So I think a lot of people are coming around to the fact that they need a grocery store. There is no food access in that community for like healthy produce, and it's something people have been complaining about for a long time, the quality of the Tops, but it's all that we have over there. So people are calculating, making some very difficult kind of decisions that nobody should ever really have to go through. Some people, one house I remember that we went to, it was a mother who was, she was out at the time and her young, elementary age daughter was home and at the time of the incident, and the daughter like sprinted home, and in the time before she got home, the mother was calling and couldn't get an answer from her, and just thinking about the not only the immediate trauma of people who were directly connected, who were there, who were across the street, who maybe just heard down the street, let alone just people who are Black and people who have, been distrustful. Buffalo has this, Buffalo's infamous for our segregation, right?
Certainly.
Our racial segregation. And I think people have grown up in, and we've been swimming in the waters of segregation for decades, right? And all of a sudden, someone invaded that the bubble of one of the blackest zip codes in upstate New York, and committed a terrorist attack against us. So it just completely shatters the psyche and the kind of.
And it's resounding throughout the neighborhood, you feel?
I think so, yeah. And I don't think it's, it comes in a lot of different forms, right? It's, for some it's fear, for others it's anger, distrust. We've had people flat out say that they don't trust white people. And, we're very intentional about how we approach people with canvassing. We go in teams. We're almost all people of color who are out canvassing and knocking on doors, just realizing the sensitivity and the rawness of the moment. And yeah, we're just there to, we don't have an agenda. We want to listen, we want to learn, we want to connect people to resources like the African Heritage Food Co-op. So we have a survey where we can determine people's needs in terms of food, supplies. Open Buffalo recently started a diaper club.
Because that's become a big issue since the Tops is closed.
Yep.
Getting those personal items just haven't been available.
Yep. Diapers, feminine products. We were able to get some formula and wipes as well. And we're trying to change the mode of just rapid response, shoveling out supplies.
Right.
It's been this kind of circus of trucks pulling in, dumping stuff out, volunteers in bright colored shirts, coming in, cleaning up a little bit somebody else's house. The community this is someone else's spot. And,
Certainly.
They don't necessarily need,
don't need babies. Don't need
all aid is
babysitters.
not
Right.
good. Yeah. All hands are not necessarily helpful hands.
Right.
So, but anyway, with the Diaper Club, what we're doing is we're having people sign up and register, and we're going to offer some other opportunities for healing. We're working on building out this a small yoga program that people can do 15 minutes. You can come in, you can work on yourself and your spirit, and whatever you want to bring to the space. If you just want to pull up and grab your bag and head off, that's fine too.
Sure.
But if you want to build a relationship with us and with other people who are dealing with similar situation, we want to build that relationship with you too.
We are talking with Max Anderson, Deputy Director of Open Buffalo, here on Buffalo What's Next. What about for Open Buffalo, when it comes to success for Open Buffalo? What does it look like?
If you would have asked me this on May 13th, I might give a similar answer. I always say it's looking at the success of our emerging leaders. I mentioned, we've had almost 150 graduates who've gone on to do amazing things. But it's really the aftermath of the attack has really shined a light on just the beautiful work that our leaders are doing in the community now. Thinking about people like Denise Walden, who's executive director of Voice Buffalo. She's constantly running herself into the ground, supporting other people, and being there as a resource to the families, to TOPS employees, to people who are directly impacted. We have, on the other hand, Razi. So Denise went through our Emerging Leaders class in 2016. She also worked for us for a number of years as well. Razia Hill from our 2020 class, she has a nonprofit called Every Bottom Covered. And you definitely have to have her on this show.
Okay.
She has come by Open Buffalo with dozens of boxes of diapers, and we've been able to distribute thousands of diapers to people. And she's she was doing this way before this became like a mainstream issue, because access to supplies for kids and diapers has been an issue for, impoverished communities for a long time. So this is just, the supply chain shortage and all the 2021-22 economics has kind of brought new light to those things. But she's been doing work to support the community around that for years. And, we have others who have, our city's first poet laureate, Jillian Hainsworth, India Walton was in our first class of emerging leaders. So we're just really, and we see them like really springing into action in this moment when there's so much need and so much pain. And really coming with, you can see there's a lot of diversity among those people, right? We have people who are interested in politics, the arts, direct services to the community. But
yet they're fueled, it seems to me, back to that whole thing about passion. There's a passion for their community and to try to improve the conditions for Black people in Buffalo.
That's true, yeah. And I think, a lot of people in our work are empaths. I don't even know if that's a real word, but I know that's a very popular word.
It most certainly works in a lot of conversations.
Yeah, but we feel very deeply. People that go through our program, we really help them to find out the power in them and like what skills they have to bring to bear to improve Buffalo. So it could be, we knew from the jump that India was a really great speaker, right? Really powerful. I remember I was teaching a workshop one year, and she had come back as a trainer, and people were doing group work, and I'm a pretty soft-spoken guy, and I need to get the attention of a room full of people, 50 people who were in small group chat and, chattering. And I'm like, India, can I borrow your voice for a second? And she got everybody back.
I bet she did.
And Jillian, is an amazing poet. We have Leah Daniel, who started a nonprofit fostering greatness to help and empower youth or people who've come through the foster care system. So really just the diversity of our alumni base is really incredible in terms of their interests and the different areas of life in Buffalo they're able to impact.
It's interesting, you mentioned India Walton, for example, somebody who came out of your organization, obviously made a huge impact in terms of politics. It was just last year, wasn't it, that she ran for mayor and seemed on the verge of winning that office for a point. What about for Open Buffalo, though? Obviously, India, she clashed with the city administration. Open Buffalo, what's the relationship with Open Buffalo and the leaders of the city of Buffalo? We're a 501c3. We're an apolitical organization. When we see issues that need fixing, we work on those issues. We like to say we focus on the policy, not the politician. In 2016, we really started looking more deeply at some of the disparities in policing and incarceration. And what we did is we went out and, first, we tried talking to city leaders about the issues and the need for community-oriented policing, which is, more officers getting out of the cars, getting out of the squad cars, building relationships with people, walking beats, and that level of trust building that was absent at the time. We tried talking directly, and nobody would listen to us because, I think sometimes there's not that impetus to change unless something big happens. Sure.
So what we did is we went out and talked to 2,000 people in the city at bus stops, on corners, at barber shops, at community centers, and we administered the survey to them and said, what are your perceptions of policing in Buffalo? How do you feel the police department respects you, your community, people of color? Do they respect women? Do they respect immigrants? Do you feel safe calling the police? If something was going on in your street, would you actually call the police? And we were able to take that data and, crunch the data with some of our partners, like Partnership for the Public Good, which is a local think tank. And we were able to come up with 21 recommendations for improvements to policing in Buffalo, really centered around that concept of community-oriented policing. And, we've seen a lot of those recommendations come into place, like body cameras, pilot program for that happened after we launched our report.
So you can't. So what you're saying is you have been able to move city government to a certain extent. Obviously, there's more that you want to do.
Yeah, to an extent. We definitely don't shy away from we don't shy away from direct engagement with leaders and with politicians. But we also don't shy away from activism. So, we like to have a direct conversation, make some direct asks or demands, like in terms of policing, or when I was talking earlier about the pushing for a community benefits agreement with the Buffalo Niagara Medical Campus. If you get it rebuffed and pushed aside, then, you re-strategize, you come back with your people, and you figure out how are we going to build enough power to make someone listen to us?
Max, I wrote down 1,000 different questions here, but our conversation has veered off into some really interesting directions here. And since we got onto the topic here about addressing policing in the city of Buffalo, again, this is anecdotal, but perhaps rather than a full-length survey of things, but is there a sense that there have been improvements between the police department and the black neighborhoods of Buffalo?
I think there are definitely a lot of positive efforts and overtures being made by the police department. A few years ago, Commissioner Lockwood announced that every officer coming through the academy was going to be a community-oriented police officer. Okay. Right? That language was not used before we had started really pushing for this and complaining about the need for this relationship building, right? So that includes, de-escalation training. It includes diversifying the classes. When I'm the cadet classes, so when I'm driving around or if I see police officers driving by, I am seeing very diverse faces and different genders, behind the wheel of the cars. But in terms of trust and building and relationship building, we haven't done a survey since that original one. I think that hopefully the department is doing some kind of surveying of its own to really see how they're doing, and not just waiting for to respond to complaints about brutality or about people being mistreated by the police.
Because clearly there's a legacy here that's going to take. It's not going to change people's perceptions overnight.
Right.
There's no doubt about that. I just want to veer off just for a second here into your personal story a little bit in your own bio. And this caught my attention. You developed a passion, I'm quoting here, for personal growth through linguistics, communication, and cultural mashups. Talk about linguistics just a little bit there and what lessons are inside that, because it's one of those things, maybe it's not something that everybody thinks about, but linguistics holds a lot of insight into culture, multicultures.
Mm-hmm. So, I grew up in a very multicultural household. Well, our culture was Jamaican. Like my parents and my older brother moved to the U.S. a few years before I was born. But what happens with a lot of new Americans is you kind of build bonds and build community with other folks who are from different countries. So Thanksgiving, we would have, we'd celebrate American Thanksgiving with friends from Korea, from Africa, from Ireland, all in our home, and I feel like it helped me to develop just an understanding of how folks communicate, how to, I feel like I have an ear for languages and kind of hearing through accents and language barriers that other people might have. And that led me to really loving and pursuing language study. So I studied French and Spanish and international relations. Also understand patois from our country. But really what I think it helped prepare me to do, that kind of upbringing, is to just meet people where they are, to hear them, to listen with, my whole being, my whole heart, to really, sometimes there might be a barrier, and you see someone maybe in a customer service situation getting frustrated because the customer has a language barrier, right? And then they try talking louder, or they get angry. But if you really just simmer down a little bit and maybe listen and observe, use your whole active listening toolkit, we can really understand each other and cut through a lot of our differences, and really translate what we mean into any format. And I think that's going back to the storytelling aspect and helping our emerging leaders to communicate. It's really helping people to get those kind of core observation skills and listening down, and being able to communicate with anybody about anything.
Max Anderson of Open Buffalo, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
This is Buffalo What's Next on WBFO, WBFO HD1 Buffalo, WOLN Olean, and WUBJ Jamestown.